Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and today, as I often do, I'm building a tank. You probably can't tell how different this is from the usual tanks I build, but if you look closely, this is a water tower for steam locomotives such as those I have on my model railway. This is the ratio N-scale round water tower kit. N-scale as in British N-scale, so it's 148th scale. There isn't much to the box, and not much in the box either, but let's have a look anyway. There's a couple of sprues with all the bits and pieces you'll need for a water tower, though I will be adding a few of my own. The plastic parts are quite neatly moulded, and you won't have to do a lot of cleanup to get the parts to fit together nicely. The detail seems reasonable. There isn't really much to it, it's not an especially complicated structure, but it does look pretty good. It seems I just can't escape photo etch. In this case though, it's good photo etch. It doesn't need any bending or anything like that, it's just a fine ladder. A plastic one would probably look out of scale. There's also some, I assume it's fishing line? It looks like fishing line, or maybe nylon guitar string. Whatever it is, it's here. There's also some sort of material for the canvas, pretty sure it's called a bag. Though as far as bags go, it's not very good at holding stuff. Here's the instructions. There isn't much here, but there doesn't need to be. This is a fairly simple build, and you could probably figure it out without the instructions. Time to glue some bits of plastic together. It doesn't really matter where we start, but I begin with the water tank because why not? Gluing the sides onto the base is quite simple. I figured it was a good idea to be mindful of where the two halves will join, so I put the seams in line with the spout and ladder, which are probably the wrong terms. Well, ladder is probably correct. I did this partly because I wanted the seams to be less visible when this is on the layout. The viewing angle is going to be from the side, if you consider the water crane part the front, and I do. Another reason is the ladder can partially obscure those seam lines. The parts do go together nicely, and the seams aren't especially noticeable, but they are there. Depending on the primer you use, they may vanish when the model is primed. On the bottom of the tank, I add a small disc with a rectangular depression. This is where the tower part, or whatever you want to call it, will be attached. You can see that it's rectangular. You want the long edge, though it's not really much longer, but it is longer, and it should align with the hole in the bottom of the tank. Otherwise you may have difficulties later on. I then attach the top of the tank. The little hatch part should be on the opposite side to the water crane. Time for the support. This is made up of two parts, and while they don't really have any keying to guide the fit, it is pretty easy to get the parts together how they should be, though do be sure you've got the part without the center bit around the right way. The plate with the rivets should face outward. Then the support pole can be glued onto the base plate. You want the previously mentioned plate with rivets, or maybe they're bolts. Whatever. You want that facing away from the protrusion with the little square bit on it, as I've done here. Now for some fiddly bits. I glue this wheel onto one half of its mounting bracket. It's easier to glue this in place, make sure that it's not at some weird angle, then leave it to bond before attaching the second piece of bracket. That does take a little bit of extra time, but it does also make it a bit easier to do. That assembly goes into place on the right side of the tank. Again, if you consider the hatch end to be the rear and the water crane to be the front. This is the pulley for the water level gauge. This here is the arm for the valve that lets the water out of the tank. I trimmed the end of this so the angle was sharper and it would sit properly flat on top of the tank like so. I'm not sure if this is the correct angle, but it looks close enough to me. Just to try and make it look a bit more interesting, I used a piece of strip styrene to make a sort of indicator for the water gauge. This is 0.4 by 1mm styrene strip. I'm sure it doesn't need any markings painted on it or anything like that. I mean, these water towers aren't meant for distributing precise measures of water, and the gauge is just a vague indicator of how much water is in there, but I thought it would look a bit more interesting to have something behind the little gauge thing that hangs down from the pulley. Here's the fishing line, or whatever it is. I'm not sure if this is meant to represent both the give water now rope or just the gauge, and I used it for neither. Mostly because it's all coiled up and it really wanted to keep that shape. I'm a bit impatient, so I didn't want to try and straighten it. Instead, I used a thin styrene rod. It's 0.5mm in diameter. It's probably a little bit overscale, but it'll do. I glue the rod onto the little disc that serves as the gauge indicator, trying to get it right in the center. Then I figure out how long I want the thing to be, and cut it to size. Believe it or not, the next step is to glue the indicator into place. First, where it joins the pulley. Then, after a bit of kajiggering, I add a touch of glue at the indicator end, so it hopefully stays where I've put it. Probably not entirely realistic, but it looks good to me, and it was a lot quicker and less annoying than trying to get the fishing line to straighten up and fly right. Or just straighten up. It doesn't have to fly. Next, I attached the bag to the water crane. I've used a black flexible superglue for this, but probably any superglue would work. I don't know what this material is, but it's not plastic, so plastic cement probably wouldn't have worked. I followed that by joining the tank to the column, or whatever you'd call it. This is pretty simple, as long as you get it around the right way. It's a good idea to leave this to bond for a while before doing anything else to it, so that's what I did. Then I add the crane to the bottom of the tank like so. You could just glue this, but I wanted the crane to be movable, at least for a little while. So I do this the fiddly way and put the support bracket into place. I make sure it's all lined up and glue the bracket so it sits against the plate with the rivets that I mentioned earlier. I wanted the crane to be movable because I figured it would help with positioning the model on the layout, and it's kind of fun to play with. Now it's time for the Fire Devil. I'm too Australian to understand water freezing in pipes, so I had to Google what this was for. It's pretty small, so that does make it a little bit fiddly, but it does go together easily. You will probably have to do a bit of nudging to get the long pipe straight, and there's no keying for the top part, so you've just got to glue it on and try to get it centered on the vertical pipe. I didn't video it for whatever reason, but I've glued a piece of thread from my sewing machine to the Make Water Go Now lever. That's the technical term, by the way. This is much less curly than the fishing line. I did coat it with some thinned down PVA just to stop it from being so light and wavy, and I would expect paint, when the painting happens, to help with that even further. I then take the photo etch ladder and superglue it into place. Obviously this is metal, so plastic cement isn't going to work here either. Here's a piece of clear plastic. Its transparency is irrelevant, I'm just going to use it as a mounting plate. I'm using superglue here again, not because I think plastic cement won't work, but because it will be a lot easier to break off the base if for some reason I want to. I then glue the Fire Devil into place, so it sits under the water crane. Then I add the drain part. The reason I've attached these to a base is probably obvious, but it's so it's all set out how I want it to be, and then when I add it to the layout, I won't have to arse about positioning 3 individual things. Speaking of positioning, I test fit this on the layout, along with the coaling stage I built a while ago and a couple of grounded vans. I'm still not 100% decided, but I think it makes the most sense to have the water tower further from the end of the line so it's more easily accessible. I've used my 5MT as a guide, and I feel like that engine should be able to take on both water and coal here without having to be turned around to do so, though I would imagine this kind of thing is more for small tank engines working in this industrial area. It's probably not entirely realistic, maybe the water tower should be on the main line, but I don't really care. I think the story is going to be that this is the remnants of an actual loco servicing area, which is now only in use for local shunters, or something like that. In the end, I'm using the rule of cool, not trying to be hyper-realistic or represent a real location. This will make what was going to be a simple head shunt a little bit more interesting. Anyway, that's the N-scale, 148th scale, round water tower by ratio completed. Obviously it's not been painted yet, and it will certainly look better painted, but it is a nice kit, and it does already look pretty good how it is. I'm not an expert on this kind of thing, nor am I a rivet counter, so I can't tell you how historically accurate the model is. It's probably fairly generic to make it usable anywhere, but the detailing does look quite good. The important thing to me is that it looks the part and doesn't cost a lot, and this kit certainly checks both those boxes. I'm happy with the result here. It was quick and pretty easy to build, and it looks like a water tower, which is really good if you want a water tower. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. Subscribe here if you want to see more of this kind of thing, share the video with anybody you think might find it helpful, and if you really like what I do and you want to see videos a bit early, consider supporting on Patreon. There's links in the description. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.